From Quito, Ecuador, I'm Sweeney Gray and this is From the South, the evening news brief from Telesur English. We start this new edition right now. The Venezuelan National Constituent Assembly has approved preparations for municipal elections in December in a follow-up to regional elections held October 15th. ANC President Delcy Rodriguez said the December vote will be a victory against imperialist agents that refuse to acknowledge the Venezuelan people's previous electoral decisions, where millions of people voted in favor of the Maduro administration. The Lima Group, represented by 11 countries from the Americas, has been meeting in Canada to discuss the situation in Venezuela. The group was set up in Peru after it failed to persuade members of the Organizations of American States to adopt a resolution in favor of intervention in Venezuela. The United States did not take part directly in the group, but Venezuela said the Lima Group was following policies designed in Washington. The Lima Group issued a statement after its meeting, which repeats many of the themes that failed to win support in the OAS. It rejected what it called manipulation and irregularities during the regional elections on October 15. It again called for the release of so-called political prisoners in Venezuela, and it reaffirmed its support for Venezuela's opposition-controlled National Assembly. Our correspondent Reagan Devines joins us live from Caracas. So Reagan, Venezuela is once again preparing for elections. Can we expect the opposition to take part this time?
Hi Sonia, good evening to you guys, good evening to our viewers. It's not quite clear which groups will take part. We know thus far that one of the groups, Voluntad Popular, has said a few days ago that they refuse to take part in the upcoming municipal elections, which we know today will be carded for December 10th. They said that they have no trust in the system whatsoever, and they have really been angered over the past results of the regional elections just about 11 days ago. They said actually they want a rehaul of the entire electoral system, and they want all of the current members of Venezuela's electoral council, the CNE, out. I think on those terms they will reconsider, but at this point in time we just know of one group thus far out of about close to 20 opposition groups that make up the MUD coalition that will not be taking part, or thus far said they will not be taking part. There's quite a bit of mendacity flying around, so we're not too sure if that will change in the upcoming future, but they did say that they will. And that group has the very famous Freddy Guevara in that group, who has been one of the faces of the so-called resistance Venezuelan opposition, the far right, who were involved in some very dangerous and violent protests a few months ago. Another election we will be seeing quite soon is one for Zulia State, which we have also found out today will be happening hopefully within 30 days. Zulia State Legislative Council has declared vacant the governorship, which means that the person who won that position, the opposition's Juan Pablo Guanipa, will not be able to assume that position because he did not swear in front of the National Constituent Assembly. He has responded on Twitter saying that the decision is unconstitutional, and the Legislative Council's decision, as well as the CNE, as well as the actions of the National Constituent Assembly, are all unconstitutional. So, and he also plans to go live at 7:30 this evening on Twitter to express himself further. But yes, Venezuela is preparing for its initial stages of preparing for its municipal elections this coming December, where the government hopes to really assume its position of moving forward to combat this economic crisis, and of course to show the international community that Venezuela is one and plans to move ahead as one, Soini.
Okay, so thanks for that update, Reagan Devines. Reagan Devines in Caracas. The Catalan Parliament has been debating its response to the Spanish government's decision to invoke Article 155 and suspend Catalonia's autonomous powers. Thousands of students marched to the Catalan government's headquarters in Barcelona as the president, Carles Puigdemont, said he was leaving it up to the regional parliament whether to declare Catalonia's independence immediately.
I think that the president has always had a strategy. It's correct to say that he was going to call for elections. However, the Spanish government did not back down. So now it's up to the parliament.
Our correspondent, Rimina Piñate, has the latest.
I am outside Parliament where hundreds of people are gathering after the president of the Generalitat, Carles Puigdemont, decided he will not call for regional elections. He has done it so, he says, as a response to a government that isn't given any guarantees to suspend the application of Article 155. After the announcement, he gave the Parliament full capacity to respond to the Spanish government about the application of this article. Tomorrow, there will be a voting session at the Parliament to define what this response will be, although there is still a door to declare independence.
Rimina Piñate there. To the Caribbean now, where the West Indies cricketer Chris Gayle's defamation case against Fairfax Media for alleging in an article that he exposed himself to the team masseuse during the 2015 World Cup in Australia has begun. Gayle denies the charge and says his reputation has been damaged internationally as a result. The trial is taking place in Sydney, Australia. His accuser, Leanne Russell, described the incident as horrific. She told the court she spoke out about the incident after Gayle's infamous Don't Blush Baby interview with journalist Mel McLaughlin. Last year, Russell spoke about the incident with the Age newspaper in Australia. Gayle says since that article was published, he feels people are out to get him and he's especially paranoid around women. The 7th Assembly of the People of the Caribbean, the APC, has begun in the Dominican Republic to discuss issues of importance to peoples of the region. The conference opened with a celebration of the 100-year anniversary of the Russian Revolution. Delegates came from all over the region to take part in the conference. They are expected to talk about food sovereignty, agrarian reform, climate change, social movement, and migration. The APC was created to try and create a more integrated Caribbean. The 7th conference ends October 30th. Hurricane season may not yet be over for the Western Caribbean since an area of instability and thunderstorms is developing in Nicaragua and Honduras. However, closer to the end of the week, the storm is expected to move away from Central America and into warmer waters. According to experts, the system has a 40% chance of becoming a hurricane, and if it does, it will be called Hurricane Philippe. CARICOM Chair and Prime Minister of Grenada, Keith Mitchell, has described Wednesday's CARICOM Mexico meeting as a success. He says they have committed to forming a partnership to address disaster planning, recovery, and new trade opportunities. Mexico and the 14 Caribbean community countries agreed to work together to ensure that they achieve the optimum outcome from the upcoming International Donor Conference to be held at the United Nations in New York, November 21st. They have also decided to work on realistic solutions to disaster recovery and mitigation, especially during hurricane season.
These include implementation of sustainable energy technology and early warning systems to strengthen resilience and reduce vulnerabilities. We'll also take joint action in multilateral fora and internationally to mobilize support in further strengthening the CARICOM institutional capabilities to disaster risk management, including on economic issues such as graduation as high-income countries and preventing de-risking measures. Cooperation and de-risking is one of the main areas agreed on this 7th Mexico CARICOM meeting. The technical cooperation program in the areas of health, statistics, and ICT are also included in line with priorities of CARICOM Strategic Plan 2015 to 2019.
But the government of Enrique Peña Nieto has been highly criticized over the CARICOM meeting. Critics and experts question the Mexican leaders' lack of proper response to the earthquake that happened last month. Our correspondent, Pablo Perez, has the details.
So at the end of the Caribbean Community Summit, the fourth Caribbean Community Summit held in Belize, Mexico's President Enrique Peña Nieto committed to train Caribbean countries on risk assessment and emergency protocols in case of natural disasters, something that hit really hard on the Caribbean countries this hurricane season. It seems a little contradictory because there are a lot of people, analysts and experts criticizing Peña Nieto's government response to the disaster that happened in Mexico City and the Istmo of Tehuantepec during the last September earthquakes. And, well, adding to that, Enrique Peña Nieto committed the Yucatan Fund, which is a fund held in the peninsula of Yucatan in the city of Mérida, which is destined to help Central American and Caribbean countries in development projects such as highways or dams, and it committed $14 million for rebuild of damaged cities and towns in the Caribbean islands affected by Hurricane Maria. So it seems that the Caribbean Community Summit was very beneficial for the Mexican president, which seems like something that he really needed in this time when Mexico is still struggling to get back on its feet after the earthquake. This is the situation here from Mexico. We'll go back to you.
That was Pablo Perez. Now for the last in our series on reports on the situation in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. We should remember that the island is a free and associated state of the United States. That means it shares the same emergency management system. But given the slow response from the White House, pro-independence activists say there could be hidden motives.
Most of the island is in ruins because of the strong winds of Hurricane Maria. Before the cyclone, Puerto Rico had filed for bankruptcy, unable to pay its debts to U.S. investors. One thing on top of another. Many say the island is falling apart and they want to leave.
Some can fly away, but others can't. They can't move.
Something else that isn't moving much is the aid from the Federal Emergency Management Agency of the U.S. government. 16,000 U.S. troops and emergency personnel are supposedly providing equipment and resources. They're said to be very reliable, but others disagree.
We've been militarized again like in 1898. To make matters worse, they brought nothing but the mercenary private army of Blackwater, which is now called Academy with an I. They had to change their name because of all those scandals when they were hired for the Iraq War and committed torture.
In the eyes of those who want independence for their country, history has proven the real intentions of the White House.
Puerto Rico has been a trampoline for the rapid deployment of U.S. military forces against Latin America. That's how it was in Grenada, in the Dominican Republic, so we shouldn't be surprised if there are plenty of military agendas behind what they're doing.
She says the island has to recover, but not just from the hurricane.
Adriana Sibori, Telesur, Puerto Rico.
More news in a minute. Stay with us. In Honduras, human rights organizations and advocates have reacted to the video that confirms that the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency's involvement in the massacre of Honduras in La Mosquita. Our correspondent has the details.
In 2012, during a combined operation between the Honduran Army and the DEA, a canoe carrying 8 people was attacked.
On May 11th in 2012, my sister and my nephew, as well as another woman and man, were killed by gunfire from a helicopter. They killed 4 people, and here we are, still searching for justice.
Throughout the past 5 years, victims and family members of the 4 murdered Mosquitos have demanded justice without getting any answers.
Those people were there unloading their drugs. We ran into the narcos as they were being followed by the American and Honduran police. As they were unloading their drugs, the gunfire started from above and a massacre happened on our canoe. God save me, that's why I'm here in front of you.
Now, after the release of the video which shows the helicopter firing at the canoe, human rights advocates confirm the role of the DEA in the massacre.
One way or another, we always know that these things happen from these kind of organizations. They are highly irresponsible and only care about the success of their military operations without care about collateral damage caused to civilians.
The investigation report was documented by human rights advocacy organizations who have assured that the Honduran government has protected the DEA members that took part in the operation.
The United States is just as involved as Honduras. As this report makes clear, an order was given to fire upon our comrades over there in the Mosquito community. It was a member of the DEA.
To this day, the Honduran government has not assumed any responsibility in the face of the victims' family members, who live in one of the country's most remote and forgotten areas.
Hundreds of activists protested against President Michel Temer in Sao Paulo on Wednesday. They took to the streets after Brazil's Congress voted down a corruption probe against the embattled unelected leader. The vote means he will not have to face trial and is free to pursue austerity reforms in Latin America's biggest economy. Our correspondent in Brasilia, Adriana Robrenio, has the details.
Indeed, the Brazilian Congress, in particular the lower house of representatives, rejected an investigation into Brazil's de facto president, Michel Temer, after the Supreme Federal Court and the Attorney General's office brought charges against him for obstruction of justice and criminal organization, along with 2 of his ministers. With 251 votes in favor and 233 against, the lower house did not authorize the country's Supreme Court to move forward with the charges, blocking further investigations that would allow them to bring Brazil's president, Michel Temer, to trial. According to the opposition, these events took place thanks to a government strategy of nepotism and vote buying. It is said that this strategy has cost anywhere between $3 and $10 billion. What seems clear is that votes were bought in order to guarantee Temer's freedom after the second round of charges. Congress had already saved him when the first corruption charges were brought against him in August. It's worth mentioning that this time Temer received fewer votes in his favor than he did in August. This makes it clear that from now on it will be harder for him to obtain approval inside Congress for a series of reforms he still intends to implement. For example, a reform to the pension system, which from this point on will likely be one of his priorities. Another important thing this vote makes evident is the great gap that exists between the interests of the Brazilian people and the interests of Congress. According to polls, 89% of Brazil's population was in favor of the investigation into Temer. Nevertheless, Congress once again has turned its back on the people and voted in favor of the complete opposite of what the majority wanted. This has been the main result of the vote. Therefore, Temer continues leading the country in a position for which he was not elected.
And staying in Brazil, the former president Lula da Silva is traveling around Minas Gerais as he builds his new political project. Our correspondent, Andre Vieira, is tracking the Lula Caravan, as it's being called.
We are here following former President Lula da Silva and his motorcade as he develops the second part of his project, Lula for Brazil, with a clear objective to build a new popular movement in order to govern the country after the next presidential election. This morning, Lula is visiting a federal institute that he created during his administration. After that, he will go to a cachaça factory, the traditional beverage of the region and Brazil. Lula is always talking to the people and listens to their criticisms, even the critics of his government and the government of Dilma Rousseff. This is all to build a better project, a better government for a society that right now is affected by the neoliberal measures of Michel Temer. Right now we can hear these young people chanting Lula's name because he was the one that gave them the opportunity to access education at the Federal Institute of Education that he created, and it was the only chance for these people to have a good education. We're still here on the side of the road as we follow Lula around Minas Gerais.
Peruvian teachers have been back on strike for the last 3 days to push the government of Pedro Pablo Kuczynski to meet their demands. The teachers argue that the government breached the agreements reached to end the last strike and that actions like the punitive evaluations of teachers are continuing. Other reasons for the renewed strike is the repressive policy carried out by the government, like applying criminal charges and wage deductions to those who participated in the strike action in June and August.
I think that the minister is doing very little or nothing for education.
They need to solve the teachers' problems once and for all, because the children have gone a long time without classes.
With a strike, they're never going to finish their studies. Just imagine, they will have to spend their vacations studying. Isn't it the government worried about it? They don't do anything.
More news in a minute. Stay with us. United States President Donald Trump has officially declared the opioid crisis a national public health emergency. Trump also announced that the federal government would work to develop non-addictive painkillers and added the government will be cracking down on the flow of the drug fentanyl.
The U.S. Postal Service and the Department of Homeland Security are strengthening the inspection of packages coming into our country to hold back the flood of cheap and deadly fentanyl, a synthetic opioid manufactured in China and 50 times stronger than heroin. And in 2 weeks, I will be in China with President Xi, and I will mention this as a top priority.
Other news now. They say the objective is to empower people to create conditions for democratic development, but everything seems yet to be done. Join us as we see how Somalia's internationally displaced people are fleeing drought and the attacks and counterattacks of the war against terrorism. Our special correspondent in Mogadishu has more.
Found shelter from this area because
here, next to the ruins of the old Italian embassy in Mogadishu, several families have come and settled for the Shabelle regions. They have no other shelter. Most of the children are not schooled either.
We ran out of food. We work washing clothes or pushing carts, and we don't have anything. When it rains, the rooftops get flooded.
These women should be empowered to exercise their rights and get organized, but they live crowded together while they stay waiting for humanitarian aid that, according to them, never arrives. There's also other people who recently arrived.
We didn't even have access to water, and we went hungry.
Fatham got here on October 7th from Yowar, in the middle of Shabelle. She walked all the way here and was welcomed by other displaced families. She hasn't gone to look for work because she says that many of the other sheltered women are also not working. They don't only lack for food and education, but also a safe house to live in. Every time it rains here, these families have to get out because each storm causes floods.
We need help. We have nothing. We don't have medicine. We don't even have daily food.
They're coming from places like Oriole, Shanale, and Barire, talking about the difficulties that they face in rural areas and the help that they need from other countries in order for them to be able to move forward and to defend peace.
here for all of our brothers from Shabelle, and we need help from the Somalian or Turkish government.
Urgent needs and dangerous situations.
Now, let's take a brief look at some of these stories making news headlines around the world.
At least 3 people have been killed across Kenya during protests over the election rerun that has been boycotted by the opposition. Police used tear gas against opposition supporters and fired live rounds in the air at demonstrators. Meanwhile, election observers have reported there is intimidation and harassment of voters and monitors in some parts of the country.
The indicators that we have so far, that where we are seeing people being intimidated in some parts of the country, already is not a very good thing in terms of transparency, inclusivity of the process. So those could speak to lack of a free atmosphere in which voters could be able to enfranchise themselves as far as voting is concerned. So that's a fear.
At least 47 people were killed by 2 explosions and a fire at a fireworks factory in the western outskirts of Indonesia's capital. Over 30 people were injured, and according to local police, the death toll is expected to rise. Over 100 employees were believed to be in the building at the time of the blast. Officials suspect an electrical short circuit caused a small fire, which then triggered the explosion. Iceland will hold a snap parliamentary election on Saturday after the current government collapsed last month due to a scandal involving the Prime Minister's father. The outgoing government would be the shortest lived in Iceland's history.
Well, the government collapsed because of somewhat of a scandal, even though it's a bit complicated. One of the 3 parties in the coalition said they would not be able to continue because of secretive behavior of the leading coalition party, the Independence Party, and so they resigned from the government, which resulted in the government collapsing, and this called for a snap election.
An estimated 300,000 mourners have flocked to Bangkok, Thailand, to pay their last respect to the late King Bhumibol Adulyadej, who died last October. Thais dressed in black offered folded flowers of sandalwood paper at altars set up across the capital. Adulyadej was known as the People's King, and his 5-day funeral, which officially began on Wednesday, took a year to prepare and is said to have cost $90 million.
We've come to the end of this evening's news brief. For the details of these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Srini Gree. Thank you so much for watching.